Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Laura Washington's sixth seminar as part of the ChiElect series. I would like to thank Winter Quarter IOP Fellow Laura Washington for hosting today's seminar. Coming to the IOP, she brings more than 2 decades of award-winning experience as a nonprofit professional and multimedia journalist. Today, she will lead us in a discussion of this month's upcoming mayoral race. We are thrilled today to also welcome mayoral candidate Bob Fioretti to discuss his vision for Chicago's future. He brings with him decades of legal experience throughout the city. I would like to remind everybody that today's seminar is on the record, which means you are free to take photos and videos. Students will also have the opportunity to ask brief questions towards the end of today's discussion. We have an insightful discussion ahead of us, and I hope that you are as excited as we are to get started.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you for braving this lovely weather. It's getting better, right?
Yeah, it's only what, 5 below right now?
Yeah,
or?
right,
Yes.
exactly. And thanks to you, Bob, for coming out.
Good to be here.
And I want to thank our live streaming audience who can't be with us, but thanks for being with us online. You've been busy lately.
A little bit, yes.
You had a big party planned for tonight. I was telling some of the students about it before you got here. A big party with the great B.B. King.
Buddy Guy.
Buddy Guy, I'm sorry, Buddy Guy.
Yes.
But you had to postpone
Yeah,
it?
we moved it over. It's later this month, and we're going to have it, and it'll still be a great time. Him and the other blues guitarist, not to be confused with the Bobby Rush congressman, but Bobby Rush Grammy Award winner also. The two of them would have had it, so yes.
And the couple students that I talked to earlier didn't
Thank
know Buddy Guy. Does anybody know Buddy Guy? Oh yeah.
All right,
I got
now
one of
that's
them.
my kind of guy.
He's a Chicago
Yes.
guy. Chicago guy through and
Yes.
through. Yeah.
Yes.
One of the greats, right?
Yes.
And you've been a longtime friend.
Yes. When I first won election here in the city of Chicago as alderman, I had my victory party there both times. So yes.
At his club.
At his club. At the old club and the new club.
And he gave you a whole bunch of money. Was it like $500,000 to your campaign? Wow.
It's more than wow. You can tell I can't even speak about it. I'm humbled. I'm really honored.
What is it? So you've known him for a while, but how did you get to know him, and what is? Are you connected to through the music or through?
Well,
the
no,
community or what?
Community. We've had a number of discussions how to build entertainment districts, how to create a blues arena. Blues and jazz I know a lot people from both of the industries. You know, when he was awarded at the Kennedy Center a Lifetime Achievement, he had a full-page picture in I believe it was the Washington Post, and the comments were just from me at the bottom of the page about him, and they did everybody that they honored that time. And I was honored to be selected by him to put something about who he is and what he is. I mean, to me, he represents what Chicago is about. Somebody who came here, just like my dad, had very little formal education and did what they can do. He does it for his kids, for the community, for everybody that he can help. And again, I am honored and humbled by his donation. So.
You have your celebrity endorsement, and Amara Enya has hers, and Chance the Rapper.
I've heard, yes, I've heard, yes, yes.
And you were just telling me a few minutes ago that you were involved with a lawsuit with Chance the Rapper.
My law firm did, yes. We sued him on a copyright infringement case of a civil rights lawyer out of New York, and it was settled amicably. So, yes.
So we won't be expecting any endorsements from Chance?
Not in the near future, but maybe after when I'm in the top 2, yes.
Yeah, when you're in the top 2.
Yes.
And speaking of endorsements, there was a little bit of news today. Dorothy Brown, the clerk of the circuit court, who dropped out of the race because she wasn't able to get enough signatures to get on the ballot, just came out today and endorsed Amara Enya, which is kind of interesting that we're talking today because in the last round in 2015 when you were running, Amara was also in that race along with Willie Wilson, Chuy Garcia, and of course the mayor. And that in that round, Amara Enya dropped out and endorsed you.
Yes.
So does this surprise you? Why did she come back to you?
Well, it was Dorothy endorsing
Right.
Mara. You know, I have to look at these candidates and what have they achieved and what have they done in the last 4 years. And I scratch my head. I mean, where have these people been? When I raise issues in the city council, every reform idea you hear, I've already proposed at one time or the other. And I was vocally criticized by them, half of them, and the other half stood silent in the weeds. I mean, what jobs have they brought? Name me one job.
And you're talking specifically about Dorothy Brown here?
Well, no, I'm talking about really all the candidates. What jobs have they brought in their neighborhoods? I don't see anything from any of the local ones. I mean, in 2010, when I stood up against and talking about the problems with pensions and pension holidays and 401ks, which are now becoming something that one of the candidates is talking about, I've never heard anything about that until just recently. So, but I got criticized by who? The one who opposed me on every reform measure, Ed Burke. He stood up and said, we are forced to take pension holidays. We are forced to do this. Well, not really. It's just a bad budgeting of what both Daley and Rahm did during the course of their administrations, their 4 years.
So let's talk a little bit about your priorities, particularly the students. I know students on campus are interested in policing and public safety issues, education issues, and economic development in particular. Could you share sort of your view, your vision on those three issues, and hopefully we can get into more as the conversation goes on?
As to education, I think we need to find ways to engage our younger folks. I mean, you folks here are some of the luckiest kids in the country, wherever you come from, what background you're from. It doesn't really matter. You're the elite of the elite. And so sometimes I think you have a social responsibility to reach out and give back to the community. You know, my parents told me, and again, I said it earlier, my dad was an immigrant. My mother was born here.
From where?
From Italy. In fact, the last name, Fioretti, means little flower, because my grandfather was found in a field of little flowers, and he was raised in an orphanage, hence the name Fioretti. My dad, when they both came here, I think there were 3 other siblings, and what happened then was his dad died when he was in 7th grade, so he had to go to work and support the whole family. Both of my parents told me, you got to get a good education. I went to Southside Catholic High School, Mendel, which probably some of you may remember. I see one head going up and down.
He's
Yes.
a Chicago file. He knows everything about Chicago.
U of I, and then Northern Illinois University for my law degree.
And you grew up in Roseland.
I grew up in Roseland. I lived in Pullman I grew up in Roseland, lived in Pullman for a number of years, and the now former president was an organizer actually in that area. And I went to work for Harold Washington in the Corporation Counsel's office. But my folks said, get a good education, work hard, give back to the community. And I believe I do that. I've had lawsuits that most people won't undertake. We've changed the adoption laws, especially in what I consider a major area, and I think it was involved with human trafficking. And in this city, human trafficking, sex trafficking is a major problem. It's nobody's talking about that in this campaign. I've tried to raise it a couple of times.
What is the issue that you want to address?
Well, I think it erodes our criminal justice system. We have about 25,000 acts of prostitution a day here in the city of Chicago. When I was alderman, I proposed a ordinance, and we had people from the state's attorney's office, the state's attorney, the U.S. attorney's office, the FBI, Chicago police, survivors, all testifying, and I wanted to raise the awareness then. I was surprised at the colleagues that attended this committee meeting. They were surprised to find out how serious the problem is, and it's still serious. WGN on Friday, this past Friday, did a half-hour series on it.
So you want to raise awareness, and are there
Well,
laws or policies you want to
Oh yeah,
enact that would address this?
it undermines our criminal justice system. Those that are Johns that are using women and young men too. I mean, we always assume that it is an issue that's related to just females, but there are men prostitutions out there, young boys that are prostitute themselves out there too. We have to, if we want to get a better hold on educational probabilities, who are the ones that really can, from our city, that happen in this? Young kids from the gay, lesbian, the LGBTQ community sometimes are drawn into this. Kids from the suburbs also are drawn into this problem. It's because we want the convention industry here so much that this also pops up. I'll bet that if you scan the papers about this week's Super Bowl, you will see about the problems that are going to be associated with human trafficking there. And human trafficking is not just sex, it's labor. It's how we treat our labor people. So often we hear about immigrants that are illegal working in some shops and factories. Well, is the owner of that company really paying the correct amount of wages? Is he or she paying the correct amount of money for the employee, the taxes? What are they doing? So I think human trafficking is a big issue. Now, to go back to your
schools
question.
And education.
Yes. I was the only, again, where was everybody else out of these 13 candidates during when Rahm Emanuel was closing the schools? I was at every community meeting. I was at the congressional hearings that we held at Quinn Chapel. I went to the school board meetings and stood up against this. I thought it was done wrong at that time. Well, that's past. We are past the time now. We need to find educational. Let me go back on what happened in my ward in about 2008. A young man called Reuben Ivy was killed right outside of Crane, and this is the primary reason, actually, that I ran for alderman. The year before, I saw in one of the papers, 6 out of every 100 African American kids that graduate CPS go to college. I thought that was unacceptable. So I ran for alderman at that time. I mean, I had Whitney Young half a block down from my house, and if I walked in the middle of the street 6 blocks away, I can see a little bit of Malcolm X College, but I could see Crane High School.
So this young man was killed.
So he was killed, and what we did was I created Operation Safe Passage. We brought in mentoring programs to help everybody. We increased the graduation level. We brought wraparound services for mental health, and I think we need to do that much more vigorously in all of our schools.
So that's a model that you want to deploy
Yes.
as mayor. Are you going to reopen some of those closed schools?
Well, I'm not sure how we're going to reopen them. I'm going to have to look at the demographics. I want to look at what we're doing. I also want to see, I think we probably 15 of them have already been sold off or out of commission.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that doesn't get mentioned a lot. That
Yes.
It wouldn't even be possible to reopen all of them,
No.
or feasible.
And some of them have become administrative centers. But on some of the other ones, instead of building a $90 million police fire academy, we can use some of those if they have parking lots for it. We can dissect some of the programs, the retraining programs for the police officers. Why not take 4 or 5 of them?
So are you against the police academy?
Yes, I am.
You'd rather put
I've
that
always
money.
been.
You'd rather
Yes.
put that money into school, maybe reopening or repurposing the schools.
Right, right.
And so, what about charter schools, and what about elected school board? Where do you stand on that?
Well, charter schools, I think there's a role for them, but not now. We have to stabilize what we've done. There were 5 new charter schools in my ward, and I started noticing what was happening. I was on the zoning committee my last 4 years under in the city council. I was only there for 2 terms. I would call the CTU rep and say, "Do you know there's another charter school going through?" "Oh yeah, it's part of the deal. Don't worry about it. Let it pass." I mean, we must have passed 5 or 6. So I look back and I see CTU being part of the enablers of the charter school process. They had something else in mind because they said it was a deal. So now we find out the deal is a unionized.
Yeah, unionized. Okay, that's interesting. And then what about appointed school board?
You know, it says that
versus elected?
I have a hybrid position. Actually, I've been always for a fully elected school board. I think you may recall, and I'm not sure if the students here recall, but we tried getting it on a citywide ballot. And I left the alderman in the office who was going to go down and get it stamped. I don't know what happened, but he didn't get it stamped in time. He got it 7 minutes late, so we never had a hearing on it and never got on the ballot, unfortunately. I think today it would pass with 72 to 78%.
And I think all the candidates are in favor of some form of an elected school board.
Right.
And moving on to economic development, which is obviously goes right to the heart of what's challenging about the South and West Sides in particular. What is your economic development?
Well, that's another interesting result. I've been talking about economic opportunity zones for quite a while. I've been in contact with the person that wrote the executive order on that. Economic opportunity zones are a new tax measure. We have 133 of them passed in the South Side and West Side. There are also 2 in the Michael Reese area. But what it does is allows investors to come in and not doing it like a TIF, but what it does is that they use their money and they get tax incentives off of it, but their money would improve the communities. Now, it's meant to stabilize communities. It's meant to bring medical centers in there, educational facilities, and commercial activity. I think it could be a game changer with the Trump shutdown, though. The IRS was supposed to issue some of the regulations that will govern it, and I think it could change the face of our city in terms of what we're doing. We won't see a $900 million TIF for a Lincoln Yards up north, $900 million of our money, taxpayer money. Instead, we will see the developers using it themselves.
Where do you stand on TIF as an economic development tool? Do you feel like it's useful in some cases, or would you eliminate?
No, I think we need, at this point, a moratorium. But what bothers me is the lack of understanding of what TIF should be. TIFs could be used for, I mean, since our city is 1/3 TIF, the maps cover 1/3 of our city, everybody. What does that mean? We can be using that to redo lights, streets, alleys, curbs, sidewalks, and then use our general budget for the same operation in the rest of the area. And we get things done. We would have much better streets. You can tell, one thing I was always, when I was the alderman, I would have clean and greens. I'd have 4 or 5 a year, but I would paint everything, change the lights. There is not one alley that doesn't have, where we could, that has new lights. We have new lights on every street. I use partially TIFs for that. To do that, because I had a lot of TIFs, and I used it not to bring in the developers for the developers, but I brought it in for the citizens and the residents. Because don't forget, I know you probably said some things against me when I was running in '07, but you know, my ward was 76% African American. I won with 72% of the vote in the runoff. You know, and I did it by knocking on doors and listening to people. And when I'm the mayor of this city, I'm going to have town hall meetings on the budget, and I'm going to have a ward meeting every year just for all 50 wards until we get it down to a reasonable size. We have term limits, we have a smaller city council, and we get rid of aldermanic privilege.
Okay. I want to move on to policing. Something else that was in the news today was that the consent decree, police consent decree, was just signed off by the federal judge, and so it's going to become a reality. Did you support that consent decree as it stands, and what is it enough? What more needs to be done in terms of enacting police reform, bringing down the crime, solving more crime, and ensuring that there's better community police relations?
Well, I think your last line, you hit it right on the head. We need better police community relations. I don't think we've had a professional superintendent run the department in years, and that's been the problem.
What do you mean by professional?
Somebody that knows the streets, somebody that knows that could have updated our training, our hiring, our training, our supervision.
Eddie Johnson's came up from the ranks. He'd been at the highest levels of the police department as an administrator, and he'd been on the
But
streets.
did that make him a professional to run it?
You think?
I don't think so.
What's the difference between his experience and skills and what you're looking for?
Well, I'm looking for somebody that has an understanding of the department. I don't think Eddie Johnson does. I mean, I don't know if I asked all the other candidates if they read the consent decree. I think only one may have, and that was Lori, but absent that, I don't see it. See, to me, I call it the McCarthy tax. It's going to cost us $28 million. If we would have had proper supervision, I believe today that the Laquan McDonald shooting would never have occurred. He would have been counseled from day one, not Van Dyke. Van Dyke had some issues that were popping up repeatedly. They should have brought him in and counseled him. Suicide's a major factor right now in the Chicago Police Department. We've had 5 and maybe 6 since June. We've had 4 police officers killed in less than a year. I mean, there are issues out there too. They've got to carry a gun. They've got to go into a neighborhood that they're not well liked, and they can be even from the neighborhood. I talked to a lieutenant, sent me something today, who lives on the west side, about his issues and the people around him. And it's not fun to come back out to your car and see it all scratched up because you're a police officer.
So going forward, what does that mean? You said you read the consent decree. Is there more that can be done to advance that, to make sure it's followed? As mayor, what would you do?
You know, I did say that once we were at that stage of a consent decree, it was going to happen. But if you look through it and people read through it, it's common sense items. It should have been instituted a long time ago. And again, they don't look at the officer. They look at the officer as an object and not what the officer's problems may be themselves. So I do think it's a start. It is a start. And again, I think we need to be more proactive in terms of what we do. I had police officers, I had 6 districts that affected my ward. My ward started in Bronzeville, went to McCormick Place, Soldier Field, the Willis Tower, all the parking lots. I didn't have the United Center, but the parking lots around the United Center, and far west into East Garfield Park.
It was a very convoluted set of boundaries.
Yes, it was.
And why was that?
That was, they like to, I think politicians like to pick their constituents, and I think the person who I replaced, I think they felt that she was going to just be a pawn in whatever the developer said, and she would say yes to everything. I think the new remap was absolutely a result of that they moved me, the second ward, all the way to the historic black ward, all the way to the north side, and my home remained was not in that ward. I look back at it, look at what happened. I am convinced it was set up for the developers to help them get things done and not hold them to what they say, to make sure that they had community benefits agreements, which I was asking to hire from the community. I mean, I brought 8,000 jobs, and most of those were from community residents, Abla Homes, and the old Henry Horn, Rockwell Gardens. Those, yes.
So you were talking about Jason Van Dyke. What about the sentence that he received, a 6-year sentence for second-degree murder, and also the police officers that were involved in accused of cover-up who were exonerated? What do you think about that?
Well, twofold. As to the 3 officers, I looked at the charges when it first came out, and without even hearing a piece of testimony, I thought, they're going to be found not guilty, whether it's a jury or a judge. And they took a judge, and she issued a 28-page opinion, which I have not read. I started and then I got cut off and I haven't finished reading it.
Why did you think, they didn't have a case?
No, I
Or
did
they
not
make the
think
case?
they had a case.
So it was a justified
To
verdict?
me, yes. And I think the judge applied the law, listened to the evidence, and did what she thought was appropriate. Now, as to the sentencing on Van Dyke, again, the judge looked at, and not that I know this judge. I've worked in, I've had a lot of defense cases especially in the last few years.
In the criminal court system.
In the criminal, at 26 or at some of the other outlying courthouses. You know, he heard the evidence, and I've been asked, and he heard every word of the evidence, and he made a decision based upon the facts and the law. Now, whether or not I doubt if the Attorney General is going to appeal it. I know the special prosecutor was looking at it for an appeal. I doubt whether that's going to happen. They only have a few more days left. They have, I think, another maybe 10 days before they have to make a decision. I look at Van Dyke. I doubt if he's going to appeal, because for him to appeal, it may be foolish at this point.
Are there any reforms that we should enact going forward to prevent this from happening again?
Well, I think there are some in terms of what needs to be done, but all that has to go through Springfield. And I doubt whether any of the reforms, I mean, we have to push for reforms, reforming our criminal justice system, what we need to do. You know, I'm going to pivot for a moment, like marijuana. You know, we're going to, let's say we legalize it tomorrow. But what about all those people in prison? I'm glad they're raising the issue that I raised a couple years ago. What about people who have it on their records that they're not the administrative ticket, but what happens those that have been arrested for it? How do you get that off of your record? You know I'm a no-box person, but at the same time, if you've got a conviction, why do you have to go through all of this to expunge your record? I find it ironic that the clerk of the court, she likes to hold all these seminars on expungements, but very few of them, you know, you have to bring in $250, you got to do this, this, and this, where's your rap sheet, and most of them don't qualify. So we should make it easier for people to expunge their records, though, and not have to go through a whole process.
Now, one of the biggest problems the city's facing is the financial one, and particularly around the pension obligation, and you've said that you would find a way to meet the pension obligation without raising taxes. How would you do that?
Well, it's a secret. So, no, I have said it, this is one of the major reasons I got into it, because people were not talking about it. And it's an issue that has to affect everybody, because if we don't solve that pension problem, we're not going to have police, we're not going to have fire, we're not going to have really money for schools, even though it's a separate budget and they can tax separately. It's just not going to exist. Whoever's sworn in on May 15th, by September 1st, has to find $400 million. I know the Tribune says 230 some, but it's about closer to 400 million. We pay right now $900 million into our pension fund. We need to find $400 million this year, for $600 the next year, $800 the next year, and $1 billion the following year. So we'll be paying $2 billion. 6 years ago, I proposed the commuter tax, and it's a tax imposed on people that live outside the city but come here, and they work here. Wisconsin, Indiana, all the suburbs. We have 800,000 people that come here. 1% of their income, which they can still write off on their federal income taxes, would create $300 million. It's a question of equity, fairness. If something happens to them on the street, they want a police officer. If they get hurt, they want an ambulance. You know, where do they spend their money? Yeah, they may spend 40, 50 hours here, but they don't pay property taxes here. They don't have their entertainment centers unless they come in here, but they have them in these suburbs and in Indiana. There's no way I will raise any fees on the people of the city of Chicago in my first term.
No property taxes, no fees of any kind?
No.
For 4 years you're pledging?
No.
Or
yes.
Even Daley won't do that, because Daley says
I know that.
He says that first he says he won't raise property taxes, and then he says if he does, he'll do it on a one-for-one basis where he will cut whatever he raises. But you're committing to no taxes,
Yes,
and
no.
you think
Because-
you can replace all that with the commuter tax?
Well, that's 300 million right there. And there are ways in this budget that we proposed long ago that would have saved money, and I think we've got to look at that. We've got to look at what we're doing with our TIF programs that are picking up $700 to $800 million. At the same time, we've got to broaden our base by bringing in businesses and new businesses and small businesses into these economic opportunity zones. And I say this combined with, we have anywhere from, it depends, 11,000 to 22,000 people from our prisons that are released basically in 7 zip codes. We've got to train them. We've got to put them to work. North Dakota has an incredible prison system where they train everybody and then they get them into the trades. We could probably put a lot of these houses back on the market by giving these individuals the adequate training to help revitalize our own neighborhoods.
I want to shift into some of the demographics of the city. There was a study just out by the Gen Forward Project, which is out of the University of Chicago, that looked at younger voters and younger residents. In fact, and looked at specifically at Chicagoans aged 18 to 29. This is just out. I don't know if you heard about this. And they found that 36% of the kids, or young people in that category, said they want to leave the city. I'm just curious around this room. Now you all are in school right now, and you're going to finish up first. But how many of you want to stay in Chicago once you're finished with school? Oh, that's probably better average than this one.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Did that surprise you? And what can we do about that?
No, it didn't surprise me. Even though they may stay for a while, but what I find is after a while people want to move out. In the later part of that age group, they may settle down. They'll live in one of the trendy areas, and then they start to move out.
Why?
Lack of educational opportunities. They're fighting for their kids to get into school. Sometimes jobs are not as fortunate. It's interesting on how the new sharing economy leads us to sharing apartment spaces at this point. Rooms like this may have 4 or 5 apartments in and around it, and you have a common stove, different refrigerators for each one, different pantries for each one, so they can use that. I think lack of educational opportunities, really lack of good jobs, and I'm hoping that people here are not saddled with the debt of some of the people that I know. I counsel a lot of younger folks. I have one who works for the county, went to University of Michigan, John Marshall Law School, and then Northwestern for an LLM, and he has a $400,000 debt. I mean, how do you get rid of that at this point? I mean, working for the county, you're not going to pay it off. And probably even working for the biggest of big law firms, it's difficult to pay off. So we need to find ways to help and keep people here. We've got the best sports, we've got the best transportation, both air, water, train, cultural events, you name it, this is the place to be. But again, we've got problems of crime. The downtown area is not immune anymore. Our neighborhoods are not immune. So we've got to bring that level down to make people feel safe.
So what do you say to younger voters as to why they should look at you? There's several candidates in the race who are younger and who are trying to appeal to a new generation of voters. What is your message to those voters?
I do have a track record. I've employed people. I've employed and made sure we hired from the community. When United moved to Willis Tower, I was instrumental in that. It was a younger workforce. They were all out in Elk Grove Village. I said, we've got to move them up here. and I signed off on the money for it, the TIF appropriation for a major company. Why? Because I thought when people are going to look out their windows, looking out west and south, they're going to say, I'd rather live down in this area. And the truth has happened that that's what has happened. I built 5 parks. I would walk through the parks and I'd see younger folks. Yeah, Alderman, I work at United, thanks a lot. Sometime later, oh, this is my girlfriend or this is my boyfriend. We're getting married. Worked at United. And then before you know it, they had a buggy and they were pushing that. And we're moving out of the city because they couldn't get into schools. But I think we can spread the wealth of education, spread the wealth. You know, again, you got to look at what the other candidates have done. What jobs have they brought? What have they done all these years? You know, my wife and I are advocates for school systems. She's a leader for autistic kids, even though she's a leader in probably affordable housing throughout the state, and one of the few experts on it. But we need to make this city affordable. And how do we do that? By making sure that we have young people here that can live here, that enjoy it, and can improve the daily life. And that includes giving back. And when I said the autistic community, I mean, we're big in a lot of the cancer prevention or younger kids with cancer. I have a support group because of the cancer I had that meet, you know, I mean, I'm on the phone probably every day with somebody that has cancer. You know, and I'm 8 years cancer free, but you know, you could tell I'm dry because of it. But you know, I mean, you have to get back to the community, and I sometimes scratch my head, where have these people been? I mean, I have a Christmas party for 120, 130 needy families every year. Whether I'm an alderman or not, it doesn't matter, but it's a way to give back. What have these candidates done?
Well, we're continuing this series, and so I'm going to ask them as we move along.
Good.
Why don't we open it up to you, to all of you, and for questions? We've got someone with a mic, so raise your hand if you. Kyle?
Thank you, Jay. Well, thank you, Mr. Fioretti. It's been a very interesting discussion so far. So my question is kind of more of like a technical one because I'm just super interested in how taxes work, and I don't really understand it as much. How would you identify and actually target the people that commute from suburban areas to the city, and how do you sort of make that tax a reality? I think it's a really interesting idea, but I struggle to see how it could be like effectively instituted. Thank you.
As complicated as it sounds, it's not a bad, it's easy to implement. We know all the 800,000+ people through the Department of Employment Security down in Springfield. And so they're right away identified. So we know who they are. And we can assess them the 1% through that. So the mechanisms there, who they are, we already know it.
And what would be the instrument of that assessment? I mean, would there be an annual payment or a fee, or how would that
Well,
work?
it could be assessed different ways, yes, or on regularly out of the paycheck. And it's so small. Again, it becomes a question of fairness. I mean, they're here in this city minimum of 40 hours usually, but more like 50 or 60 hours. And we can find, and they spend that time. I remember a woman from McHenry County came up to me and grabbed me on my shoulder, elbow, and she was like, how can you be doing this? As she was coming out of the McDonald's on Clark and Monroe. And I asked her, where do you live? And I said, we got into a longer conversation as we were walking down the street. She owned a 17-acre farm. She worked as she was at a large law firm, being paid fairly substantially, and over 100,000+ as an administrative assistant. And she had 15, 16 horses. Well, I know she's not paying the property taxes here. And we are the economic center. You know, these jobs are not going to float outside. I mean, the media picked up and played into Rahm's hands, because Rahm was trying to get rid of the head tax at that time, which I did believe was a job killer. But if, you know, there's a line of people, if you don't want to pay it, then quit your job. But I can give you a line of people that will replace you at that same job, or move in the city of Chicago. It's as simple as that.
Is this commuter tax been tried in any other big city
It
successfully?
has been from time to time. New York has had it. They've switched over from to other forms of tax. You know, Philadelphia said that they had it, and for them it wasn't helpful. But Philadelphia has a different kind of limited economy too. So, and don't forget, there's 2 cities out of the top 12 that don't have term limits, and one is called Chicago, and the other one's called Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
So. Kyle, you set everybody up. I know it's a tough question, so go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fioretti, for coming here. I had a question. Since you've talked a lot about, you know, talking against things before, you know, like everyone else sort of opposed it, especially in terms of Ed Burke. And so now with his recent arrest and sort of the investigation into Solis, I was wondering, do you support campaign finance reform and specifically publicly financed elections in Chicago, which is yet to have sort of meaningful campaign finance laws like New York?
Well, yes, I do, first of all. And I've always been in favor of campaign finance reform. The question is, New York has a different type of system. Don't forget, their budget's 80. Ours is 10 million. Theirs is 80 million. And so the campaign financing is a lot different in how much and how you qualify for it. We have to look closely at what we're going to do if we go into public financing. But our city's strapped enough that I'm not sure if the taxpayers want to be paying for my election. They may be much more in favor of, let's have small campaign limits of maybe 5 or 10,000 maximum. I mean, let's face facts. Tony Preckwinkle is bought and sold by the unions right now. $2 million. Who was she going to respond to while she was negotiating contracts with one of them? You know, you got to shake your head. Is she any better than an Ed Burke who was shaking down a developer? No, I don't think so. I mean, we need strict, adhere to numbers. And I'd rather see that because, you know, whether the number's 5, whether the number's 10,000 max that somebody can contribute, so be it. I mean, Willie Wilson disappointed me. I told him that he should never break the cap. And he goes out and throws in 100,000 plus of his own money.
Explain
And
what you
then
mean by breaking the cap.
we had a cap that if somebody gave more than 100,000 to their campaign, that opened the floodgates. So individual, and he broke the cap. So all of a sudden, all this big money poured into the mayoral election. It could have been very much more reasonable. I mean, some of these candidates would probably not have raised, you know, they would have raised very small amounts.
Where do you stand on other good government proposals, particularly around the Ed Burke scandal? There's talk about term limits. There's talk for aldermen and mayors. There's talk about rotating committees. I mean, you've served in the city council. What's your prescription for ending the kinds of corruption that we're seeing in this
you know,
case?
one of the other things that some of the candidates, well, I'm not in favor of term limits, but I'm in favor of terming the chairman. I mean, I got to scratch my head. Again, out of the top 12 cities, only 2 don't have term limits, Chicago and Philadelphia. That could go a long way in stopping the corruption and stopping the benefits.
So you'd want term limits for the mayor and the aldermen?
It has to be.
How many
everything.
terms?
Most out of all the other cities, out of the remaining ones, all of them have 2 terms, except for one city, and I think it is Phoenix, which allows three terms, which goes to 12 years. But all of them, and there's one city that allows 8 years, but they're elected every 2 years. So you get a 4-time term limit.
Now, what about outside jobs? When you were alderman, did you also practice law?
I did, but I didn't. For me, it was 50, 60 hours a week. I would go in on Sunday afternoon, because I would go into City Hall on Sundays and read through everything that was coming up in the legislation. And it was a barren building then, and go to my law office and work sometimes on Sundays, late afternoon, to go through things that may be coming up, not for me, but for other people, and make suggestions.
So
Yes.
what do you think about going forward? Do you think it's
Well-
okay for aldermen to continue to have outside jobs, outside income?
Once we reduce the size of the city council, I think we have to boost the pay of the aldermen, have a professional staff instead of a patronage staff like zoning, finance were all built on patronage, and so were all the other ones. You name it, all of a sudden the aldermen have all the people that are in their ward office who are committee chairs there for them. So we need professional staffs across the board. We need to get rid of aldermanic privilege, top to bottom. It should go. We're the only city that out of the municipalities that allow that. I mean, that would go a long way to ending segregation in our neighborhoods, which I think is all brought about because of that too.
Okay. I think, did you have a question?
I,
No?
my question has been answered.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yes, thank you.
Over here.
Hi. So I see that you're in favor of a Chicago casino. So could you speak a little bit about why you think that would be advantageous for the city and what that could bring?
Well, in 2010, I gave a speech before the City Club, and it was in September. I looked at what was happening in Indiana. They were gathering $18 million at the 3 casinos over there a year. We didn't have a blockade to that. People, you go to the church, a lot of the churches on Wednesday, and they got the buses lined up going there. And you go to the parking lots there, because I went to all 3 of them. The parking lots, I wouldn't say 9 out of 10 cars had a city sticker, but virtually they did. It was 9 out of 10. I'm not in favor. I've been to Vegas only a few times in my life. I take my $100. If I win it, if it goes beyond 100, that's it. If I lose it, I quit betting. You know, there is issues over it. It could bring in some revenue, but everybody that was running for mayor in 2010 then said for 2011, oh yeah, we need it. Well, what year is this and what time is this? Tell me when it happens. There's also an issue by the hospitality industry. The hotels with over 1,000 rooms want a little piece of that license. If the governor signed the bill today, we could probably have it within 4 or 5 months at McCormick Place West, because it's fitted for that. But what happens then, that may not be the permanent place. But again, going to the hotel industry, those hotels with 1,000 rooms only, I think we have 7, all want a small piece of it. And they'd put it in their, who knows, their grand ballrooms or whatever, and share some of it with the other hotels. But all that money has to go into the pension fund. I mean, police and fire are at 20-some%. Even with the projections, I don't see us closing the gap fast enough. It's got to be closed by 2042. I don't see that happening because people are living longer. Widows, widowers are living longer. I talked to a woman 23 years since her husband died. She's been receiving the pension of her husband, or the proportionate pension of her husband, 23 years. And she looked awfully healthy to me, and I think there's another 20 years to go on her.
And you're committed to protecting the
Yes,
pension promise? You're
Yes,
not in favor of going and trying to get a constitutional amendment or anything to change that?
No, and even let's say today we pass, no, tomorrow we pass it, but I am an employee that starts work with the city today. Well, that's not going to affect me because I get all the full benefits. I'm going to be working with the city for 20 or 30 years, and then how many years after that am I going to be retired? Another 30. So those 60 years are not going to affect me. So, I mean, it was just a joke when the mayor proposed that one. I mean, he proposed what I call the 4 C's: a casino, cash, cannabis, and something else.
Constitutional amendment?
Constitutional, no, yes, the constitutional amendment. The cash was the pension obligation bonds. That's just kicking the can down the road. You know, and marijuana, the legalization of marijuana is not going to give us that much in taxes. It is estimated that it'll probably result, for all the municipalities across the state, $20 million. We're 1/4 of the population. Say we get 5. Say we get 6, 7 out of it. That's a drop in the bucket. But yes, it'll save on police and you know, state's attorney, prosecutions, things along those lines. But it's a drop in the bucket from what legalizing marijuana will do for us.
We had a question over here.
Thank you so much for being here today. Skin Deep, great choice for a campaign song. So I'm
Thank you.
very much
Thank
behind
you.
that. So my question, I did a little research and I noticed you were the last to enter the mayoral race. I was wondering if that was a strategic decision or how you came to that decision, and if there have been any ramifications of doing so.
Well, you know, one or two of them get up, and Paul Vallis has said everybody but me who got in afterwards, but Lori Lightfoot says, oh, you know what, I got out there first. Well, big deal. I was actually circulating petitions in September. That Saturday before Rahm announced that he was not going to run, I'd already cut a commercial. Then the Van Dyke trial happened. I was still listening to a candidate to come forward. I wanted somebody to talk about how we're going to solve these problems. And most of them are, at best, a one-trick pony. They only have one idea, and that's it, and not solving all the problems together. And you know, it's a measure of hope. It's a measure of healing, especially after what we've seen on these police cases. It's how we're going to bring people together. And yeah, I think my past and who I am and being a civil rights lawyer, I understand the problems that face this city. I'm not afraid to walk into any and every community, and I've been in every community, even when I'm not running. So, you know, I think it's a red herring thrown out to criticize those that have ideas.
Well, but has it been a challenge, more of a challenge for you getting in so late, officially getting in so late in terms of fundraising and?
Yes. Yes, because a lot of the money is taken up. You know, I did run for county board president. Somebody else was named, and he was going to run, and then all of a sudden he decided not to. He was on several radio stations one day saying, oh, Bob Fioretti should be the choice. Now, I had to think in the middle of October. Petitions had already started the day after Labor Day in that race, and I started shaking my head 6 weeks late. Could I get enough signatures? We went to print them. It was terrible rainstorms that whole mid-October, but within a few weeks I had enough signatures.
You're talking about Todd Stroger? Todd Stroger, the previous?
No, against Tony Preckwinkle.
But who were you talking about? Was talking about getting into
Richard
the race?
Boykin.
Oh, Richard Boykin.
Yeah, Boykin
okay.
was all set, and because of the way the phone was ringing off the hook, and we did well, but we didn't do well up in the northern suburbs. You know, I mean, you can look at what Tony Preckwinkle has done to the southern suburbs and western suburbs. She's never even heard of him in economic decline. And so I'm worried about her even being mayor when she talks about things that she will do. But it was the same thing. I was hoping that I'd hear from somebody about what to do. I mean, coming off of another campaign, you got to go to work. You know, this becomes a full-time job. So it's important. And yes, a lot of the fundraising money was tied up already. I gave to X or Y or Z.
You had given to previous?
No. They had said to me when I called them up. Yes.
So you're playing catch up.
Yes, I am. But it's been fun.
Yeah.
And you know,
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Campaigning is fun. It really is. You know, if you listen to the people, they've got great ideas. I mean, people really do. When they snag you on a corner and start talking about their kids or grandkids, I am just so happy from what I hear. But the problem is how we govern. And how, I went to my first city council meeting on December 12th when Ram announced his pension issues and how he was going to deal with it. And I hadn't been there in a while. Well, they did, since I was no longer elected, I get to be on the floor though. I can walk around. But I saw that they have it now because the activists had a fight to create a community comment section. Only 30 minutes. You get 2 minutes to talk. So how many are you really hear from? Well, when that section started, the aldermen walked out. About a third of the aldermen walked out. The rest were on their phones, and maybe 4 or 5 of them may have been listening to what the community was saying. They should be listening more often to it. I mean, I held town hall meetings throughout my diverse ward to get better ideas. And I went through, I'm very active still to this day in the Pullman neighborhood, in the Roseland neighborhood, and I try to do things down there. But
what would you say is your base? Because this is a 14-person race, and there's a lot of demographics and constituencies and neighborhoods that are going to get sliced and diced. So who do you appeal to get into the runoff?
we have 72 neighborhoods. I have people in each one of them. I don't
77
have,
community
yes,
areas.
Yeah, but it's more the new one, the 5 new ones that we built, but which are people just moving in and creations. But I have people in every neighborhood. And I find it interesting because when I walk through them, whether I'm at a MacArthur's, at a downtown restaurant, at a Gale Street Inn up north, or on 75th Street at the restaurants down there, or Lem's Ribs, people come up to me, I'm voting for you. And I'm like, thank you. I don't know who you are, but yes, you know what I mean? So I have people throughout the city. And I think it's people that want to have real change, substantive change, that want to live here and have good, safe neighborhoods. I mean, my vision is that, we should have good parks in every neighborhood. Neighborhoods should be safe. And I tried to do that when I was the alderman. I mean, we had the 7th largest drug dealing corner in the city. And I made sure we broke that up so that it wouldn't be happening anymore. And we did break it up. So my base is everybody.
Any final questions? Well, I guess I'll throw in more political, kind of a political one out there, and that is you've been an alderman, 2-term alderman, and I don't think that there's been an alderman elected mayor in my lifetime. There have been a couple aldermen who've served as mayor, but they were appointed, Volandic and Sawyer, but they were appointed by the city council, which would make it appear that's a tough path to get to the mayor's office. Why do you think you're different?
Well, because I do have an understanding. I did fight for change. I did fight for the people. I do practice diversity in my own life. I represent the working people of this city, and those that want to be working people. And working people is from the blue collar to the people that are white collar workers. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of this city, and I want to make it the good for everybody. And yes, being an alderman is, I would introduce, if you look at my record, 50 to 70 ordinances every meeting. And you got to go through the process to get there and how you get it. But so you times that, let's just say it was 50 times 10 meetings, that's 500 ordinances a year. Well, virtually each and every one of those got passed. They got passed.
Ordinances that you introduced.
That I would introduce. You don't do that on good looks. So you got to make sure it gets done, and you got to stay on top of it. And they were mostly designed for my community, but we did a lot across the city for it. And I've introduced the controversial ones that got passed ultimately, from police reform to what we needed on bringing people back into town. How to use TIFs for the benefit of people, how to create credit unions out of the TIFs, how to use TIFs as banks so people can have a mortgage. Those last two didn't pass because they were stymied by finance or the mayor's office on all of those.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for running, and thank you for being here today. It's been a great conversation. The IOP is planning another round of conversations around policing and public safety with the whoever ends up in the runoff. So if you end up in the runoff,
Oh,
hope
no,
you'll-
I'll be here.
I hope you'll go. Well, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you
Good.
very
Thank
much.
You, I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, everybody here.